have you had about this? How
It
many
it
thoughts?
is. I mean, I think what we're getting down to though is the importance of knowing what we're talking about when we're talking to each other. The importance of defining terms, not for argument's sake, but if somebody wants to know my mind, well, you need to know how I use words. You need to know how I use words because you want to know my mind. If I want to know your mind, I might have to interrupt and say, well, now hold on a second, real quick. What do you mean by this word so that we can more effectively communicate? But this is something that when I look at it, this is something that I have done since I was very young, is to organize the human experience so that I know, I guess at a certain point it would be so I know what I'm thinking about because I wasn't really talking about it. I was just analyzing it and viewing it for myself. Let's look at it real quick, just for fun. I am going to put what represents the human being, and that's this little box. So let's assume that this little box has no sensory organs and no peripheral nervous system, and it never has. It came into the world, although it doesn't know that because it has no perception of the world. So what do you think? What would it see? Its experience be like if it had no sensory perception on any level whatsoever? Including I no central nervous system, so no introspective, born that way, so it can't create language because it never heard language, it never did any of that. So what's going on? It's a rock, right?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, if you can't
Nothing,
perceive even pain, stimulus, no stimulus.
no stimulus,
Yeah. I don't
no
know. I
thought
don't,
because you have to learn the language construct. There's nothing to logically deduce because you don't see or perceive anything to deduce or to be logical. So you're a lump. You it's you a mass is pretty much it. All right, so I'm going to add a circle onto the little block, and that represents the human brain. So we got a brain and we got a body in this example. And I'm also going to add, how about another box that goes around this box, and that represents sensory perception. And I'll draw some arrows so we can remember as we look at this. So this arrow is the body. This arrow is the brain or the mind. Brain is a more physical way of looking at it. Mind is what is that brain doing? It's creating the mindscape, you could say. And then this outside is sensory organs or even our peripheral nervous system so that we can sense our own physicality, our own physical being. I'll put ability, which would include organs. Uh, and I'm not going to write this, but it would also include an internal communication system. That internal communication system is what we would call the peripheral nervous system. And there's other things going on as well. Probably some that we still don't fully know about. That's all good. So now this this lump now has sensory perception, meaning that maybe it has eyes and it can process light, at least visible. That's what we call visible light. Who knows what other creatures, if they can see a different spectrum, if they have more color cones, they see something totally different. So we have our eyes, we have our ears, we have our skin, so we can feel pressure, temperature, so we have skin and little things going on in our body so that we can feel temperature. We have a peripheral nervous system so we can look at ourselves and we're like, oh my God, I exist, I'm here. Does that make sense so far? Okay. And then all of this is processed Whoops. That's where we really start to use the word mind. That's when it's even more appropriate. What picture is it creating? That's what the mind does. So you know how a camera, it does have to actually flip the image and everything, because it goes in, the image goes into the camera and it's upside down. And so you got to flip that. Same thing is happening. The human brain has to flip the image back upside down. It even fills in blanks, and it even removes certain things from the picture that it views as non-essential. Your nose and your field of vision has been deemed by your brain as non-essential. So it kind of filters it out. And we know that the brain will also put things in that maybe it is missing information, but it will provide temporary information based on things that it has learned in the past. So your brain is essentially creating this composite snapshot based on its available sensory data. And then what is in that snapshot? Emotion, our electrochemical physiological soup is in that snapshot picture that's occurring. Whether you know that you're paying attention to how you feel, you still feel how you feel. Whether it is above the threshold of recognition is irrelevant. We're still feeling something. We're perceptive creatures. That's how we're able to walk from one place to another, because we do have proprioceptive ability, even though we're not above the threshold of active recognition and deliberately paying attention to it. So the human brain is taking in this information via our sensory organs and our peripheral nervous system and some other things maybe that we don't fully understand yet. And it's communicating to our brain, and our brain creates a composite picture of that available data, how it sees it based on its physical, I guess you could say, hardware. A different type of animal would have different hardware. Does that make sense? Software can be pretty similar because we both have attention, we both have cognition or consciousness to a certain extent. We can both interact with what we would call the outside world. So sometimes we can have similar software, but the hardware can be really different, especially if you start to get into like aquatic animals. They have totally different hardware than a human being. So they're perceiving the world, their composite picture, totally different. We call that the perception of the hawk. So here's a fun thing that I learned to do, and I can't understate its importance, I can't overstate its importance. Yeah, I can't overstate because it's so important. It's really important. But there was a moment where I realized, and this is, you can find this in like Plato's allegory. We can see this in all kinds of different things throughout history, is that even in like the movie The Matrix, because you don't know, the whole world could have just been turned on right now and you're part of a program, and it had memory as your personal history was a part of it. You don't know. That's philosophy, and that's only fun to a point. But you have never existed outside of your composite picture. The picture that your mind is creating is the picture that your mind is creating, and you have only ever been in that. So here's a way that I kind of can visualize it. Let's say that you walk into a dark room, and that dark room is filled with screens that can create like what looks like one big picture. When it turns on, it's the picture of the world. It has a sky, and you can see buildings and other people, but that entire thing is just inside of your mind. You've never stepped out of that. So it's like a running movie. Does that make sense? But it's a running movie that most people aren't the director. They're not the writer. They're not doing it as they go along. They're not guiding things. They're allowing things to guide them. And then that's when we get philosophers and psychologists, and the environment is shaping the person. Of course, there's a combination of two happening at all times, but which is leading. So in this picture, we have what is essentially the human experience. We have a human brain, we have a human body. That body has sensory organs and a communication network inside of it so that it can communicate what we would view as outside and inside to create a picture inside of our brain of the present moment. So let's say something happens. We'll call it stimuli. So this happens, putting it like it popped, like something happened, stimuli. So stimuli, whatever it is, maybe we see it. Light reflects off of the stimuli. The light enters our eye, and it actually doesn't enter, it just reflects off. So no light ever really enters your brain. Reflects off of your eyeball, and this is all happening very quickly, but your eyeball will take the image in, flip it around, your brain will process it and kind of impose it over that composite picture, the world view, our perspective, what we're seeing, our experience. So stimuli has happened, and maybe there was sound as well with that stimuli. Our brain also took that vibration of air into our eardrum, sent electrical signals to add that to the composite picture of our present moment. All of this, mind you, could be well below the threshold of active recognition. It's just occurring. It's a dynamic. It's the human experience. So stimuli has occurred. Our perceptive organs, in this example, are interacting with that stimuli. And this is all before the composite picture has been made. And then our sensory organs will send electrical signals via that electrical pathway, electrical, chemical, we're not getting into the details. And it goes to the brain, and the brain creates a picture based on that data of the stimuli that just happened. And maybe that stimuli is something that isn't pleasing. Then you'll have an emotional response, maybe fear, maybe disgust, maybe anger, maybe irritation. And now your irritation is a part of that composite picture. You're in a room that, in this imaginary like sci-fi scenario, you walk into a dark room and then it all of a sudden lights up. That's the world, your perceptive ability in this example. So that's your emotional response is being added to the overall composite picture. And so when someone says, well, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that, what they're really talking about is my emotion is a part of my composite picture that I call my life experience. I call it my life. My mind is creating that composite picture. It's taking all of these different available bits of data, organizing it, putting it together, and it's like, okay, here's what will keep you safe. Don't walk into this, walk around that, learn to interact with this. And that's kind of what organisms do. All this makes sense so far? Very basic, but we don't need to go into the nitty-gritty details. But so oftentimes when someone is talking, it's sometimes difficult to discern, maybe because maybe they haven't discerned where and what in this process are we even really talking about. And it's really important to know so that we can communicate more effectively where in this process are we talking about things. Now, of course, what we talk about a lot in Qigong, and we've talked about from the beginning, is that the emotional response is usually not a result of stimuli outside of the body. What most of our responses are coming from are stimuli inside of the mind, and we call it thinking. So it is stimuli inside of the mind that is affecting the composite picture of the outside world based on a running stream, and this would be more true to our current world that we live in, an almost endless stream of internal self-talk that is influencing that composite picture that the mind is always creating to the nth degree. And then we're labeling it, judging it, comparing it, contrasting it, thinking about it. And usually what we're thinking about is these little bits of self, my likes, my dislikes, my desires, what I want, what I think I deserve, what I want revenge because I think other people don't deserve things, or whatever it is that we're focusing on, because the human being has the tendency to get down on their knees, get way down at one little aspect of the human experience and focus on it to the nth degree. And it is a severe imbalance over long periods of time. It accumulates into that type of imbalance. What's interesting about the capstone is the act of backing away and just taking a more broad view of all of those little bits and aspects. And you know that they're a part of you. You know that your desire is a part, not it's not the totality of the human, the things you want to change about yourself. Thinking about it is the definition of ordinary cognition, because that's the shit you always think about. That's why we call it repetitive and habitual, because you're always thinking about the shit that you need to change about yourself so you can be this image that you have created in your mind that's a part of that composite picture of what we would call the future moment. And that's all just happening inside of the brain. Does that make sense?
Except the response isn't just emotional, it's also physical. I mean, that happens to me when I'm upset, when there's interference in my alignment. My heart starts to race and I feel tension in my body, and there is nothing happening but my thoughts about it.
Yes.
There is nothing, there hasn't been a change of temperature or barometric pressure or any actual stimuli other than my thoughts causing my physical body to respond. My autonomic nervous system is changing based on the stimuli it's getting from my brain, which is occurring from everything you just explained.
Yes.
So it's physical as well.
Well, let's look at that then. I'll add that and how that looks. So we have a chemical response. And we would call that emotion. People just, it's interesting, we have more bacteria cells than we have human DNA. We are a chemical experience more than we are most other things. We're also a mineral experience and an energy experience, but again, that's looking at these different aspects of ourselves. So we have a chemical response, we have a physical response in our body, because Donna mentioned that she gets tense or her heartbeat starts to beat fast. So we're having a chemical,
or your blood pressure,
or your blood pressure,
hormones even. Yep.
And then the big kicker, action or output is affected. So the stimuli on the outside gets processed by our sensory organs, is organized and put into a composite picture that we call the present moment inside of our brain. And that's what we would call our perception. That's what we are perceiving. And then because of that entire process, that will ultimately affect our action or our output, which your thought is a form of output. You're putting that out into the world. It's coming from inside your brain someplace and then, trickling or vibrating out into the world. Now, but what we're really talking about is that there is no outside stimuli necessarily. It's an inside stimuli called thought that creates the chemical response, that creates the physical body response. And 9 times out of 10 for most people throughout their day, it is also creating the action response. More thought and more physical behavior that is a direct result of the internal stimuli creating the composite picture of the world around them. The more you think about shit, the more you spend time on the internet, the more you're doing these things in that stimuli inside of the mind, it adds to the composite picture of the world around you, even if it's erroneous. That's called an unconscious bias. You start locking doors because you see a certain type of person. Your mind has associated this person with unsafe for whatever reason, whatever
And
that
and
is.
every time you do that, it
It
reinforces,
will reinforce it as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
and adds to it so that it becomes, people say, well, it's normal to respond that way. It's normal to respond that way if somebody does that. And I don't know what normal means, but
it
it
is
more or
normal.
less may be habitual and repetitive.
Yeah,
It's not necessarily, it's not necessary. It
no, not
doesn't have
necessarily.
to be that way.
Doesn't have
But
to be.
yes, if you're not breaking it all down and observing it for what it is, then you can't see where the element of your own thought, all of those conversations, like I began class when somebody asks me for advice and then we talk about, so I don't ever really give them any advice. We just talk about breaking it down, and then it is, okay, so what parts of this are self-created? And if they're self-created, then you can make steps to reverse engineer it and reduce that response or change it in some way, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is if there's no pop stimuli, we are self-creating it, all of it. That's why I have no problems, because I'm not sitting here generating them. I'm not thinking about them. I'm not creating them. Then Ernest, you're putting your head in that. No, I'm not
Or
creating it
recreating them.
or
Yeah.
recreating it through habit. It's just that simple. Like I said, a house could burn down. I can experience challenges. Shayna's going out of town for a little while. There's a lot of things for me to juggle and navigate. It's not a problem. I do feel a little bit of pull here, a little bit of pull there. I know why it's there. What happens in the human experience is that at a very early age, we get down on our hands and knees and we start focusing on this one little narrow aspect of the human experience called thought. And we do it so much and we focus on it so much that eventually it's all we can see. And it's all we can do to experience our world is through a thought, because we have identified with it at a certain point. We think that it's us. We think that it's the only way that we can solve problems, even though I can take you through an experiment where you can't think about shit you don't know about. So all you can do is think about shit you know. And at best you can organize it. And why are you organizing it? So that you can communicate it or remember it unto wisdom. That's the only reason that we would ever need to repeat things to ourselves, is so that we can remember them, so that they can benefit us and others around us. But we don't do it that way. We don't focus on life that way. And so we get so focused on this little thing called thought, that thought is responsible for a vast majority of that composite picture without you even knowing it. It has influenced the composite picture, which we would call, like, look at my box in here. Let's just say that this little box, that's my perceptive ability. Like, I can't go beyond that. Beyond this box is the unknowable, because I'm a biological entity, and for every biological entity, it seems, at least empirically, that we have limitations to our perceptive ability, because we only have so many. It's finite. But I'm gonna add one more thing, and this is hydrostasy. So everything I've talked about before this, up to this point, fits very neatly into the first three layers of the practice. Hydrostasy includes one other aspect, and I'm very careful about how I talk about it, because again, a lot of times in the world today, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. We just talk about stuff and we don't even know what we're saying. The energy body. I would prefer not to use the word spirit. I prefer to not use the word faith. I prefer to not use words that are most popular in religions, because this is a non-religious practice. Qigong is mind, intention, exercise. But there is an unseen aspect to the human being, and there is an unseen aspect to our composite picture. And those two can perceive one another, in a manner of speaking. And that is more like temperature. It's more like sound. It's then processed into the composite picture, and it feels like ... Usually the ... will be what we would say is good words, normally. Or maximizing. I feel like shit. I just got in an accident. I got shot. but I still feel this totality, and I still feel this connection, and I still feel, and this is when the word comes in hydrostasy, an abstract quality. I call it abstract because Donna might not see it, Lauren might not see it, but I do. And that's what, this is my composite picture. I will never climb into your composite picture. So it doesn't matter what Donna feels or what Donna sees or what Lauren sees or what anybody
What I
else sees
see or
from their
don't
point of
see
view.
in, or what I see or don't see in you, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
It's what
because
you perceive, right?
right, because what you think is my composite picture is still just your composite picture. So when people say that you're just seeing a reflection, that's what they're saying. That's what that philosophy means when we say that it's just a reflection of yourself. Your anger, everything is just a reflection of and it's like, no, it's not a reflection of me, it's a reflection of that asshole over there. Okay, but that is your composite picture of that asshole, not theirs. So it's subject to all of your biases, all of your opinions, all of your points of view, and it is just this little box of composite picture that we have learned to identify with. We will fight to defend. Some people will even kill because they're so attached to their composite picture, their point of view, that they're incapable of accepting the fact that the composite picture is unique to the individual and every perspective has a degree of validity. Seeing is expanding your composite picture. It is standing up and not just narrowly looking at one tiny aspect of the human experience, but you can start to see more of it, including what you thought was the outside world is just a part of yourself. That's why I don't have higher self, lower self, upper self, shadow self, downer self, former self, because it's all just happening now. The convergence point is now, and I am all of it. We love to say these things. I am the whole universe experiencing. The capstone of this practice is to actualize that as a part of your composite picture of the moment and keep your mind there as much as you can. And now your view, it's as if you are the universe who happened to manifest as a human being, and you're seeing experience through this composite picture, but you know that it's just your composite picture. It's not the composite picture.
That's where the activity of engaging the space comes in, because when you see it from that, I mean, I just, as you explained the last few sentences there, I could see the line drawn of your thought, your experience, your life, your whatever, our life is a line, and the gaps between the thoughts about it. And in that gap, when you say if when you when you do this with your hands, to me that's the space between the thoughts. And when you're engaging the space between the thoughts, that's when you are not solely operating from that composite picture. That composite picture is just one of the lines in this in the experience between the gaps. The exist So engaging the space is between those things. You don't have to declare war on them. You don't necessarily have to change them. You just have to recognize what they are, which is just what this whole first part of the class was explaining. Understand how that came to be your perception, and then in between those windows of memory, thought, perception about it is the space between them where everything else exists in this moment, in addition to that window of experience and perception and opinion or whatever else is in that line. It's the gap between the lines. It's the space between it all where new thought opportunities, other things that are happening besides your perception of it exist. And that creates the energy body because it's the space. And it's still your perception of it because we can't escape that. We're human beings, but we can still be aware of it and engage it.
Right. Yeah. And then what's really great is that when we realize that it's just a composite picture, the big realization is when we understand we're the ones creating that composite picture. We're the ones adding, or in some cases, taking away by adding other things. And then before you know it, we're consciously creating our composite picture.
And
And
that
that's
there's
the law
a
of
feeling
attraction.
associated with that, and it's space,
It's a
and it's
feeling with all of it.
peace, and it's calm. Everything calms when you see it that way. In the
Mhm.
beginning of this practice, for me, it did not calm me. It made me go, oh no, I have so much to do. Like I have to really think about this. I have to work at it because I got a lot of shit going on that I have to make space for. It seemed like such an effort, but it exists. I don't have to create the space. It exists. I just have to engage it. And that
Right.
took me a while of practice to feel, and then to want that feeling more, and you know, it evolved.
Mhm. But that picture is this picture is a just a great representation of the human experience and what is going on and what is this composite picture that includes. So the composite picture includes, and I'm going to put it in air quotes because emotion is a response, but we also feel directly our perceptive environment, what we're perceiving from our environment, according to our ability to do so, of course, our sensory organs or whatever we have available. We have an energy body available, and I don't go into detail about it. I don't try to break it up. I don't even need words about it because you can assume that if I'm talking about the energy body, it is all felt, because that is another aspect of our perceptive ability, our composite picture that we can learn to pay attention to. So that's what this practice is. This practice is learning to highlight other aspects of your available sensory data. We call those tricks of attention. We intend those tricks of attention in advance. Before you know it, you're adding to your data. You're adding to your composite picture. I call it the bubble of perception. You expand your bubble of perception. You populate your bubble of perception. You might as well, you'll never escape your bubble of perception, no matter how fast you run. The only way you can escape your bubble of perception is to have somebody clobber you over the head and put you into an unconscious sleep, knock you out, cut off, or kill you. That's another way. But we don't like that one.
Well, if you're not dead, you're still perceiving. It's just in your autonomic nervous system, and you're not making a composite picture of it because
That's the key, is
parts
there's
of
no composite picture. That's the most important part. It doesn't matter how much your body is perceiving something if you can't make the composite picture about it. It's into the void. Yeah. The two rely on one another. So the hydrostasy practice eventually is learning to pay attention to the energy body. And then the energy body, you feel the oneness in everything. You feel it. It's not this abstract ideological meme or thing that we try to teach in our 8 limbs of yada, yada, yada. Do you feel that oneness because you're so used to giving it your attention? It is that simple. All we need to do is highlight that aspect of our composite picture. What are most people highlighting as their aspects of their composite picture? Thought. Below the level of active recognition, it's mostly thought. And then that thought is creating their picture. It includes problems. It includes things that they need to solve. It includes things about themselves that they don't like, or the things that they don't want. So now we're thinking about these double negative weird things that we do. But let's say that we are watching the news and we see a tragedy. We see something that is an injustice. We will have a response to that. We can, and the response will be relative to how we are interacting with the overall bubble of perception. If you interact with your overall bubble of perception in a particular way, you can be far more adaptable. You can learn to change with change and move with these things rather than just reacting to them in a habitual way. So we have an example before us, and let's look at our picture so that it makes perfect sense. Let's say that the stimuli in this case is we're watching TV and it's a news article. And in that news article, something terrible has happened and there has been an injustice. basically what's happening is that the light from the television is reflecting off of your eye to create an image. And then the electrical network in your body is being used to transmit that information to your brain to add to your perceptive picture. I call it the bubble of perception because that's how it feels. We have been calling it our composite picture of the present moment. So the stimuli in this case is coming from the TV. It is entering my field of awareness. It's also sound. So the television is emitting vibration that pushes the air. That air, it doesn't enter my brain, but it bounces off of my eardrum. And that vibration sends electrical signals to my brain. And then my brain takes those electrical signals and adds it to my composite picture. And then it labels it, it judges it. And that's a part of the process of the composite picture to a certain extent. Again, that depends on how we've been interacting with our bubble of perception. If we've only been focusing on thought for a very long time, it is thought that is creating our composite picture, or it's really a large portion of that composite. So let's say in this scenario, we're a person who really focuses on thought a lot. That's one of the, well, that's what we're going to do the moment that we take in that stimuli. The moment that that stimuli enters our sensory organs, is processed via our peripheral electrical nervous system, and it is put together into a painted picture that we call our composite picture, or our bubble of perception, our field of awareness, our present moment, whatever the hell you want to call it. It's very likely going to go directly into the thought category. And now we're thinking about it again. And then we will have an electrochemical, physiological, and hormonal response from two things now. The stimuli that we're seeing on the television, and then now our brain is labeling it as injustice and unfair. And maybe those are good words. Maybe those are words that are perfectly applicable to what is occurring. And now we're having an emotional response. And now the emotional response is a part of our composite picture, our bubble of perception that we would call the present moment, and we call that feeling. I am feeling something as a result of watching the TV. Now, if you had never seen anything like this, never heard anything like this, and you didn't speak the language maybe, you will have a different reaction to what you saw on TV. It's not going through the same lens of perception, so you'll have a different response. Let's change it a little bit. We're walking down the street and we see a bird fall out of a tree. Well, that is a stimuli. That the vision of the bird, maybe the bird made a sound, maybe the bird has an odor. I hope not, but maybe it does. That is all added to our total field of perception, our perceptive ability, our bubble of perception, our composite picture of the present moment. And that's what we call it's happening. And then we have a response from that. Maybe that response is sadness for the bird because we like birds. Birds are, we would put that in the category of like, not the category of dislike. So we have, in terms of connection, the moment that we see it, a connection has been established. It's in my field of perception. It's now a part of my composite picture. So there is a degree of connection occurring. And then everything that happens after that is post-processing. It's going through the body. It's going into the mind. The mind is creating a picture, and that picture is usually a reflection of the way that the person thinks, because this is the world we live in. And then we have an emotional response from all of that. Does that make sense? That is the human experience. That's the nuts and bolts of what is occurring in our life. Let's say we meet somebody attractive. Well, first of all, our biological brain is going to fire. It's going to be like, ooh, procreation time. And that's a very, basic part of the human being, and it's okay. That's fine. And then we go into all of our complex human mating rituals, yada, yada, yada. So we see somebody that's attractive. Our body has a physical response. Let's look at our picture. Our body is going to have a physical response because maybe you're turned on now because there's somebody that you find attractive. And then they start talking and it's like, holy shit, they're clever. They're so smart. I like their words. Match point. You like soccer? Me too. I'm on a soccer team. I love, you like running? I like running. And now it's entering our brain, and it's a part of our thought, which in this example is still a person who really likes to focus on the stream of thought primarily. We're not looking at the totality of self. We're just focusing on one little aspect of it, the words in our mind, which is creating the composite picture. And so we're having an emotional response from this sexy person that's smart. And the emotional response is coming in because we're perceiving them. We see them, we hear them, maybe we smell them. You've heard that if a person wears a certain type of cologne or perfume, that can start to trigger certain types of things. Maybe we're releasing pheromones into the air and we're communicating with chemical romance, you could call it. That's all a part of connection to a certain extent because it is now in our field of awareness. Our attention is on it in some way. We're having an emotional response. We're having an electrochemical, physiological, and hormonal response because of the biology. Maybe the society is involved a little bit, and that's why I find it attractive in the first place, because some things that we find attractive are influenced by the society around us. Maybe I have a lot of habits created already, and I just can't help myself. And then now I'm just all in, all of my attention, all of my energy, everything is going towards that one thing. All of this is happening in the blink of a friggin' eye. It's like, happens so fast. And we tend to focus on certain aspects of it, such as the emotion. And now we're in love. What is love? It's a word to describe what? To describe typically, this is why I don't use the word very often, because it's like the word, the F-bomb. It's used in so many different ways. We can't communicate with it anymore. But typically when people are using the word love and connection, they're simply describing the emotional derivative from their available sensory data. Or there is nothing happening outside of them and it's just a product of their thought. You're thinking about the person when they're not there and you're getting all lovey-dovey. Oh, but now I'm starting to miss them. Oh, and now I'm starting to get anxious because I'm thinking about something in the future that has happened because of something in the past. This is what is called psychological suffering, the pain body. It's the trap that we get into. So what is happening, and typically what we're describing when we talk about love, when we talk about connection, typically, and then I'm going to tell you how I would talk about it. Typically, the way that we're talking about it is our composite picture that we're constantly generating includes emotional derivative of whatever we're thinking about or whatever we're seeing. It's a part of our overall composite picture. Does that make sense? Very simple.
It makes sense. And then, but where we go with it, I mean, that's what we
That's a
all
totally
do.
different topic. Yeah. What we do with it after that can be completely different. Yeah.
Well,
That's the action.
well, behavioral change.
That's the output. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Because we said that those three things, we have the chemical response, and the chemical response could include, oh my gosh, I just feel so much love right now. And then we have physical body response, and that is, my muscles are getting a little tense. I'm getting butterflies in my tummy because I don't know what I'm going to say to this person to convince them that I should be the one that they mate with. I really want to convince them of that. And so I want to say just the right thing. And now I'm starting to get nervous. That's a physical body response. And then we have our action, which is our physical response. We say something really stupid because we're so worried about what we're going to say. And then that's the action, the output. And then we run away and go vomit because we were so nervous. Now, that is a common occurrence. It just is, it is what it is. You know, if you see a tragedy in front of you, you're going to have an electrochemical, physiological, and hormonal response in all three of those areas. Very likely. All makes sense so far? That's just the human experience. It's just the nuts and bolts of what is occurring. Now, if a person is able to create space and they're able to stop focusing on just the narrow little aspect of ourselves called thought, and they start to expand their bubble of perception. They start to take in more in their overall field of view. They're no longer identifying, clinging, and attaching to individual aspects as much. They're starting to see more of the total scope. There's something in that total scope that they can now perceive directly. And that is this fourth one, and it's already in our picture, but it is this outside energy body. And it has always been affected. We just haven't listed it yet. Because the body, the energy body, will also have a response to everything that's occurring in our composite picture. Because it's a part of our composite picture. We just can't sense it. We can't feel it. We can't really sink into it because we're not paying attention to it. We're not used to paying attention to it. So it's a white stripe on a white wall. It's there, but we can't see it because there's no contextual reference, because there's not enough space to see it in the mind that is just focusing narrowly on thought. And their composite picture is a direct result of that thought. 90% of their picture, their bubble of perception, is being drawn, such as biases, such as the word that they say, love and connection and all that stuff. That's all a part of that composite picture. Well, so is this unseen aspect. And I try to limit how I talk about this with just unseen, the energy body. I don't want to get, I'll say chi sometimes, but that I don't want to get to dividing that up too much. That's an error. That's a syntax error. I could talk about that at a different time.
That's like thinking about thought too much.
Thinking about thought is still thinking. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So in this example of a person who's practicing hydrostasy, they have created space in the overall amount of thought. And not only that, they can now perceive the shine, the ignition, the connection, the vibrancy. So now this is their bubble, this is their lens of perception. Stimuli needs to go through that, but it's going through all of the layers because we're seeing more of our experience, which includes the energy body. So if I were to use the word love, it would be a connection between the unseen and the unseen. And it would be more of a perceptive thing rather than a direct perceptive thing, like one perceives temperature, rather than the way that one perceives the derivative or the response from the temperature, which is the emotion. So most people, when they use these words about their feelings, the words are emotions. That's it. Now, when we start to talk about a person who has, maybe they're a monk, or maybe they've been in prison for 30 years, who knows, and they've managed to create some space in the overall amount of thought, we can start to place our attention on the energy body. That's a requirement. You have to pay attention to it for it to exist in your composite picture. Now, it's still there below the threshold of active recognition, but it's not as useful to us in this example. So in this example, we want to pay attention to the energy body, and the only way you can do that is in a quiet mind. It is the way it is. There's nothing we can do about that.
Or a quieter mind.
Quieter mind.
Everything is all in balance. So when thought becomes the major thing and the emotional derivative from the dense amount of thought, then your ability to perceive or even distinguish different perceptions becomes less and less and less. And the more space there is in that, and the balance between them, because you're not declaring war on thought, you're not declaring war on emotion, you just, when you can break it down and perceive it individually in some sense of balance, which is always changing, if you can see it and perceive it, you'll notice the turbulence or the imbalance sooner. So that's where the output will be different in somebody who's perceiving, has more space between all of that, especially the thought. It's not less dense. And the perception is clearer. The lens of perception for feeling and noticing all of these things is more fine-tuned above the level of threshold of recognition. Then the behavioral output will also change, will be reflective of that.
Sure. A quicker way to kind of say that is that the practice interferes with the experiment. Therefore, it will automatically interfere, or it will interact and change the result over time. So it's a done deal. If you're changing the way that you interact with the present moment, behavior will change on its own over time. That's the non-interference principle. Yeah. So let's look at this from two different perspectives. We have one who is not practicing hydrostasy and then one who is. So let's say that both people are watching the news and they see what happened in Nashville. So the way typically that this would occur is they see this on TV. The light from the television enters or reflects off of the eye, processed into an image, and it is added to our picture of experience, what we would, our composite picture, right? We also heard what was on the television because the sound entered our ear, bounced off of our eardrum, sent an electrical signal, and that was added to what we would call our composite picture of the present moment. The mind creates that snapshot. And now this is our typical example. This is common cognition. The mind processes it through a common lens, the way that it's habitually used to doing it, which is typically going to be through the lens of thought, judgment, trying to control, labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting, focusing on self and focusing on other. That's typically the way that that mind, in this example, we're gonna just do two opposites, not the varying degrees that Donna would chime in and say, well, wait a second, this is to varying degrees, and that's true, but just for the clarity of the example, we'll have a person who is knee deep in the world and common cognition, and then I'll give you an example of someone who's knee deep in non-ordinary cognition, and they're practicing hydrostasy. So in the first example, they're going to do what they're habitually used to doing, and that's processing their world through thought. And so the thought will begin immediately. They'll start thinking about the images that they see on TV, and now they're having an electrochemical, physiological, and hormonal response to their thought, their response, their biases, whether conscious or unconscious, their opinions, their likes, their dislikes, and all of that is now also adding to the emotional derivative. Does that make sense? And they have no idea what the hell is happening to the energy body because they're completely unaware of it. In this example, for this person, because their mind is way too the water is being washed around way too much to feel that smooth ebb and flow, right? That doesn't, so even if it exists, it's a white stripe on a white wall, and that person in that moment is currently incapable of perceiving it because of the direction of their attention. Does that example make sense? And now they're having an emotional derivative that we could say is anger, frustration, and then maybe because they're used to doing this a lot and that it's constantly adding to their composite picture, they hate this person. And now they're going to go do violence against this person, and that's their output, that's their action. And at this point, their spirit, the energy body, is completely dysfunctional. It is not flowing smoothly. It is all over the frickin' place. And if we were looking at that in terms of traditional Chinese medicine, that will cause sickness. And eventually that person could have a long-term debilitating physical problem as well as the psychological problem that they're creating. That is the common human condition in the world today. That's what we're navigating. That is what is normally occurring. But they don't know it. So they don't know that this composite picture is subject to the perception of the hawk. They don't know that it's theirs. So they attach to it, they cling to it, they fight to defend it. And then you have Dunning-Kruger. Now you have people who are over confident with their image of the moment. It's not, they don't want it to change, make America great again. I don't want the way that I view the world to ever change. I'm so attached to it that no amount of new data is going to change it because I'm not an agile, I don't have an agile mind. I'm too busy clinging and attaching. So that is severe psychological suffering that will lead to severe physical suffering that helps to create the conditions of suffering around them. And that continues to paint their composite picture. And now it's like a snake eating its tail. That's what they see. So the next time an image comes on, the next time someone talks politics, the next time they see an ad on Facebook, they're triggered. It's gotten so fast that now we use the word trigger from a gun because that's how it feels. These are the words that we use to describe how we're feeling. And worse off is the world will look at this dynamic and say it is normal, it is appropriate, it is okay. Now let's go punch a pillow instead of going to kill that person. Let's find healthy ways to manage our anger. And I would say to a certain extent, some of those things could be helpful. I don't want to throw the baby out with it. Now let's do the other example. Does that first example make sense? And there is going to be a degree in between, of course, but we're just going to swing to the opposite end of the spectrum and somebody who is practicing hydrostasy, or they're in a form of non-ordinary cognition. Does that make sense so far, though, before I go on? That I just broke down the human experience. It's not personal. It is the way it is. This is what we're doing with ourselves. And then, as Donna pointed out, that affects physically our output. Now we're eating certain ways to cope with the stress. We're doing different things. We're looking for different types of hard drugs. We're trying to flood our system.
Well, we're talking to other people about it so we can validate the feelings that we have about it. So
that's another habit.
We're having arguments about whether our picture of what happened is the same. Are we agreeing on this? And whatever. It's just more condensing of the window and the thought about it. It's not really deriving any effective behavioral change. It's just darkening the picture. It's clouding it up, like you said, the waters. To me, it's a more dense place. It's a more dense place.
And so, okay, I'm going to do 3 examples then. So I've done one example of somebody who is in severe psychological suffering, and I would call that the common mind. That is what's most represented in the world today, statistically. I'm not creating gateways and separations and all that shit. That is a statistical fact. Most people are thinking all the time, and that thinking, I will go through great lengths to drive this point home, is responsible for the vast majority of their view of the moment. It is the paint that's painting the picture. Let's take somebody who is in counterbalance and warrior training. Okay, so they see the image on TV and they feel the pull towards the response. They start to see the thought, they start to feel the anger, and then they're like, whoa, wait a second. This is just one aspect of the moment. I don't like this. But I also know that if that image, that thing that I just saw, and maybe I'm talking this to myself as a part of my rule of 3 as I breathe, what I just saw, if I let that take me and shape my picture of the moment, that will affect my energy body. That will affect the 5th destroyer or the collective momentum of the human species in a way that is not going to lead towards something beneficial. It is what it is. I've already gotten upset. I've already gotten angry at what has occurred, but I'm not going to drive that further with unconscious thought patterns. So I'm going to go back to my practice. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to go back to the moment. I'm going to say some mantras of logic. Maybe that the change that I want to see in the world starts right here and right here, and I'm going to take responsibility for that. Back to the practice. I'm going to look at my checklist and I'm going to redirect. Does that mean that?
And everything else will unfold. So whether I feel called to do something about it or participate in something will unfold, but not until I do what you just said.
Right. Because if in that first example, the things that we do, our behavior is unreliable, because the things that we would do would still be driven by imbalanced psychological suffering and the broken dynamic of thought. So it might look like you're doing something really nice, but then again, it could just also be a further expression of psychological suffering, right? Creating certain medical equipment and medical technologies is great, but it's also an expression of psychological suffering because we shouldn't need that shit in the first place if we weren't doing the damage to ourselves in the first place. So it kind of has that little bit of both going on.
Or maybe you just counterbalance is enough and you have no interest in being anywhere further aware than counterbalance.
Mhm.
I mean, you talk about people leaving this at various points. Maybe that's enough just to mitigate extreme emotion is all I'm trying to
That's
do
fine.
with my life.
It would, because it interrupts the stream. It interrupts the unconscious momentum and the habits and the normal cognition. If you're doing the rule of three, that is not ordinary cognition because you're not used to doing that. It's not a habit. It's not ordinary for you. So it's you're doing something different. You're interrupting a pattern, and that will change automatically the result. That's the non-interference principle. We don't have to try to change, control, and manipulate a future. But what we're not going to do in this middle example is get lost down the rabbit hole of thinking, which drives everything worse. Is my anger justified? It doesn't matter. It occurred. Is my sadness over what happened, is that justified? It doesn't matter if it's justified. That's just another thought that we're going to think to add to our composite picture so we can feel better about ourselves or whatever we're trying to do in that moment. It doesn't matter. It has occurred. We're not going to deny it, but we're also not going to blindly indulge in it. We're not just going to dive into that suffering so that we can create more suffering, because that doesn't benefit anybody. It just creates more conditions for suffering around us. And then before you know it, if you're not having the same response as everyone else, you don't care. No, I care so much that I'm not going to allow myself to go into the same psychological suffering that created that. That's participating in it. And I'm not going to participate in the pattern, in the groove, in the habit, in the momentum of the fifth destroyer. I'm going to interrupt it by starving the nemesis with my conscious awareness in the moment happening now. And I'm going to go back to my practice and I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn better ways to respond. I'm going to learn better ways to act. And then, like Donna said, because we're paying attention, we feel inspired to pick up the phone, to call a friend, to do something in that moment that is more action-based than just sitting there feeling sorry for yourself or feeling sorry for the world. Which, again, if you feel sorry for the world, that's already occurred, but it's not necessarily helpful. It's not going towards the direction of inspiration and, oh, I have an idea. Like this lawmaker that said, I have no idea how to solve this. This shit's just going to happen. That's not what we want to hear from. We want to hear ideas from lawmakers. We want to hear ideas from these people that are supposed to help with this type of thing. Not just, oh no, I mean, this is just going to happen. Nothing we can do about it. Right? That's not a very elegant solution. And that person who said that is very likely knee deep in repetitive, habitual streams of thought that do not lead towards inspiration. Now, in this dynamic, the person has redirected, they've done the rule of three, and all of a sudden they have this inspiring idea. All of a sudden, that's come out of nowhere. It came out of the space that we created. It could be a creative thought. It could be a helpful thought. It could be a, right now, the best thing I can do is just vibrate at a frequency, and this is not the way that I would talk, but vibrate at a frequency of love. Do that. That's better than just sitting around feeling angry or self-righteous in your anger. That's even worse. Now we're just making shit up. And it is 100% absolutely leads to othering. It's the thought streams, that dysfunctional aspect. Remember, when we talk about othering, we're talking about thought about oneself that leads to thinking about another person in a particular way. It is a type of othering, absolutely. You're not, because we're not seeing everything as one. Now let me get to the other example real quick. In the third example, we have somebody who's practicing hydrostasy. They're knee deep in their practice. They see the same images on TV as in the first two examples. They immediately feel the pull of those old patterns and they don't go back towards it. They don't need to go back towards that pull because they felt it so early, because of the cognitive attention, because of the emotional attention, because of the attention on their balance, that no thought needs to occur about the situation. They immediately redirect to a more pristine form of the practice. And so they never went into thoughts about others. They never went into thoughts about themselves. They have interrupted these repetitive patterns to the nth degree. They can't exist in that field of perception, in that composite picture that we're creating. It doesn't exist there. And maybe there is sadness, you know, because we're human beings that have come from severe psychological suffering. So there's still the pull, and there's still, you know, I care about people. And then the spirit hasn't been disrupted as much because we haven't gone into the othering, which is thinking about others. And it's focusing again on individual little aspects that we call self and we call other. But when we're in our hydrostasy practice, specifically the capstone, our view, we're seeing more of the totality of the human experience, including non-ordinary cognition or the unknown. So we're interacting with the known. That's how I feel about what just occurred. I don't feel great about that doesn't make me feel good. So I know that that tells me something about how I want to act in the world. It's a lesson for me. And hopefully I can remember how that makes me feel when I feel things going that direction. That's what knowledge is about. We're adding to none of this is othered. We haven't othered a damn thing because we haven't started the thought streams. Othering is impossible without all of the thought streams to support them. Does that make sense? So in this example of the person who's practicing hydrostasy, they're learning from the moment and they haven't disrupted the flow of the energy body. That's the most important thing, is that the energy body hasn't been disrupted as much. And so our light is still shining. We're still connecting. We're still expanding into the infinite. And that is the best thing that we can personally do to make the world a better place, is to shine that light of ignition and self-recognition. Because we will grow. Remember, if we're in severe psychological suffering, we create the conditions for suffering around us. When we are inspired by our connection to the infinite, we help create the inspiration and connection to the infinite. In an emergency situation or in a tragedy situation, if we have the 4 aspects of the Qigong practice, we have peace in our mind, we have a calm attitude, we have a balanced emotional state, and we have impeccable self-awareness, we'll look like a leader in a situation.
Right, you can
like
still
that.
navigate. You can still
navigate.
choose to navigate based on the flux or the pull that you felt in your energy body and everything else, and your, you know, here, and in your energy body. You felt that. It just didn't disrupt it to a degree where you couldn't continue to practice with awareness on all of those things. So what you choose to do is inspired. So I'm going to guess that that's the way that you came to your decision about, I'm not stepping foot in Florida because I don't want to participate in anything that I don't want to contribute anything to the direction of where that is going. So therefore, I'm going to do this here.
Right.
You may have been inspired to go to Florida and do that there for that very reason, but
Maybe.
but that's just you
Right.
were inspired to do that behavioral change or that behavioral decision, which may change in the future, who knows, but that came from that place.
Yes. Okay, so now we have 3 examples to go on. We have one that the person is in the common mind, common ordinary cognition, and we have one person who's working the process. And we have one person who's working the process, but they have more momentum in doing it. So it is more fluid and they don't disrupt the energy body. Please circle, underline that, remember it. That is one of the most important things that comes from our practice, is the smoothness of the energy. I've drawn that in every picture I've ever drawn about non-interference and flow state. So that's really important. That's the best thing that we can ever do, because that's our contribution to the 5th. That 5th, the interwoven connectedness of the human experience, is a part of the unseen, because it's so difficult to see how connected everything really is. But the more that you're in hydrostasy, the more you see the overall connection of things. You start to see things in a connected way without thought. That's important in that 3rd example, because the thought never even occurred. There's no need for it. You're so practiced, you already know. back
You
to the
feel the,
practice
you
almost
feel the
immediately.
pull, you feel the pull
Almost
away from
immediately.
it before you let the thought stream
Or you
come.
can't help but notice there is no more pull. That also occurs. And you're like, whoa, where did that pull go? Or you feel a new pull. And then you're like, oh, something new is starting to form that I should be aware of. Let me define othering. So let me give a working definition of othering so you can see how the first two examples, especially the first one, is severe othering. Othering, no, okay, let me back it up. We only have our composite picture. That is the principle of the hawk, right? We only have our image, our bubble of perception. We can never step outside of it to see anyone else's. We can hear their stories. We can hear what they're saying. We can even see some physical derivative, and maybe things don't really add up. You know, you telling me that you lift weights every single day, but I'm not seeing it. So I'm a little confused. Maybe, maybe not. So we have our composite picture. Now, in the first example, that composite picture is being created almost entirely by the way that they think about the world, because the thought has incredible amounts of momentum. It's painting the composite picture. Your view of them, so Donna has a box. Oh, this is a great analogy. This works perfectly. If you look at the computer screen, Donna has a box. That is her field of perception in this example. Donna, go outside of your box and into mine. You can't. I can't reach into Donna's box. I have a limit. So I can't go into Donna's box. My view of Donna's box is a part of my composite picture. Mine, not hers. So my composite picture of her is a direct reflection of my composite. It's my box, not hers. Does this make sense? Because this is a tricky subject, but it is very important to understand in the human dynamic that it's
So
occurring.
how does that relate to othering? Yes,
Oh,
it's
I'll
very.
get there. Yeah. Well, the way that it relates to othering is that I am making a picture of your box in my own box, and I don't know that I'm doing that. So my view of Michael, my view of Shayna is my box. And in that first example, the person doesn't know that. So they're clinging and attaching, and now they think that's Shayna, that's Michael. That is the world. It is reality. We're clinging and attaching to little individual aspects of things. Does that make sense? And that is going to be a mechanism of thought, the way that we're thinking. Such as that example where the person in Don Juan's book, Carlos started to feel pity on the child who was poor. And then Don Juan is like, don't you dare. That pity doesn't help you. That pity doesn't help them. They don't become stronger. And of course, he's doing it through the warrior's lens, the warrior's way. They'll never become a warrior with your pity. And moreover, you don't know that they're not a warrior already. You don't know that what they're doing isn't an act of power, volition, choice, will. Maybe they're taking this opportunity because maybe the way that they're begging makes them feel shamed. Well, that shame is now a challenge, an opportunity to learn and grow and expand in your own human experience. So don't judge them, don't label them, don't compare them, don't contrast them. Now, when we see tragedies and things like that, and in that first example, we launch into thought, and then we're so confused about these boxes and these bubbles of perception that we just think that our view is the only true and correct view. That's called naive realism. It leads to narcissism, or it could. Those are two different things, but they are heavily related. Okay, in the second example, we have someone who's practicing tea. They're in counterbalance. They started to think, right? So they see the thing on TV and they're like, that fucking sucks. When is this going to change? How are we going to? Well, now wait a second. I'm starting to do it. I'm launching into this thought pattern. I'm focusing on things in a particular way. They may be justified. It's not right. It's not wrong. I don't have to view it that way. I'm just doing things in the same old way and that same old pattern. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to redirect. I'm going to use my rule of three. I'm going to remind myself that the pristine nature of my energy body is the best thing that I can contribute to a changing world. And so I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to go back to my practice. I'm going to redirect. I'm not going to other, because I'm not going to just focus on my narrow perspective of the world. Even if you view your othering as true and justified and correct and natural, it doesn't matter. It's a same old pattern. You're creating an emotion. You're disrupting the energy body because you're adding interference. You're interfering with the flow of the unknown, the unseen. It has a flow, and we can feel it. We can see it in other people sometimes. It looks like focus and flow state, optimal human experience, whatever the hell you want to call it. I avoid buzzwords, but I still understand the concept of what we're talking about. In the third example, the person who's practicing hydrostasy never started to create the thought. They never interfered. So the energy body stays strong. They continue to gain personal power. And then they see something in their behavior that they can continue to modify, or something that they can do in the moment to contribute to more change, or they don't. So they just maintain their pristine energy body because they know that the energy they're putting out into the world, including your emotional derivative, is having an overall effect. And so we're going to be the change that we want to see in the world, and immediately go back to our practice, engage the unknown, and find peace, because we know that that peace is necessary for there to be more peace. And they didn't other, because they didn't self. They didn't attach to their composite picture, their box. They didn't try to go outside of it, but they also didn't attach to it. It's a view. I am the entire universe experiencing itself as a view. I also recognize your view as the entire universe experiencing itself as a view, not the view. If we want to get closer to the view, sense the energy body by engaging the space. And then you can see more in your composite picture, such as the only way that we're ever, no matter the weather, ever going to have change is to work from the inside out. And if you think that you've changed enough and you don't need to do that, you're thinking again, and you're likely either in that middle or that first scenario. The person who's in the seer's practice can already see the energy body, the flow of things, and they know whether they're disrupting it and adding to more disruption, or whether they're adding with more visceral flow and connection. Maybe there was an emotional trigger, but they're not attaching to that trigger because they have a more broad view of the total self, not just individual aspects of the self. So yes, absolutely. In the first example, we start thinking and othering. Remember the composite picture and the principle of the hawk. Othering, any opinion you have about another person, you're drawing that opinion not from their box. It's from your box. It is your mind that you're drawing that opinion from. Does that make, that is othering. Any thought you have about another person, in a manner of speaking, is a form of othering. It's unnecessary, and it cuts us off from genuine connection that we feel in hydrostasy. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Oh, I can barely hear you, Michael. You might need to.
That makes sense.
Gotcha.
Can you describe thoughts that are othering versus thoughts that are not? You know, and then after that, thoughts that are not. Like I'll do the othering.
Okay, I could do that.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right, I can do thoughts that are othering. Look at the boxes. Looking at our boxes on the screen is a really good analogy. For your perceptive ability, right? Your field of perception, your image of the world, your image of yourself, your what your mind is assembling. Does that make sense, Michael? And before I can use the analogy, I got to make sure that we're on the same page with it.
Yes.
You have your box, that's your likes, your dislikes, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, your worldview, your emotions. That's your box. Donna has hers, Karen has hers, Shana has hers. We all have our own box. Now, the moment that I start to think about you and your box, I am othering. The reason is because I'm only doing that through my own box, because I can never get into yours. So my opinions of you are just my opinions. My view of you is just my point of view. It really isn't a reflection of you necessarily. That's always othering. It doesn't matter whether you view it as good, as bad, as beneficial, as plus, as minus, doesn't matter. It's coming from your composite picture and your thoughts about yourself, because we're talking about thoughts, right? Thinking about other people. Does that make sense? That's othering.
That's the thinking about other people. And then
Yes.
the example of not that.
A thought that is not othering. Let's say that you're practicing hydrostasy and you have created space and you're in the moment, and all of a sudden you have a really great idea. And that idea is the best way to organize the parking lot so that you can fit more cars in it. You don't know where that idea came from. You weren't necessarily thinking about that, but this elegant solution to allow more cars in your parking lot just magically occurred. And lo and behold, it would be really nice to have a few more cars, less fender benders, because of the configuration of the parking lot.
Right. Right. This happened to me this morning. Come up with call it a beautiful idea. I had an idea, epiphany this morning. So go ahead. Thank you.
But that's it. That thought wasn't really othering, right? You're not really thinking about other people necessarily. You're just looking at the parking lot, which is a part of your field of perception, and you're adjusting things inside of the world that you live in, right? That's your box. And you're just changing the lines on the ground so that more cars can fit there. And a thought did occur, like, holy shit, Ernest, why don't you just slant the fucking lines? And now all of a sudden you can fit more cars and people can get, and then go ahead and make it one direction while you're at it. That way people aren't fighting and competing and backing out in different ways. And now you have less fender benders, you have more cars that can fit in, and it's easier for everybody. Holy shit, that could have occurred as a thought, and that's not othering.
So, okay, so you're speaking into the design and the vision of any certain vision or project. You're speaking into the design aspects of it.
Well, Michael, the key is I'm not trying to reach into anybody else's box.
Oh, well, we're getting there. So I have an idea. I'm just taking this, and that's the design aspect of it. You know, how is it going to be great? What bells and whistles does it have? What are the aspects of it that are going to make it good? Whatever the design and the development of that idea is. And in this case, it's the parking lot. And then all of a sudden you say, well, the paint and what type of paint is it going to be? How is it going to be arranged? And you get it down on paper, you get a model of it, you do it yourself. We come to a thought that's, boy, if and then for me, and I'm framing it, but if I had the right team, if I had this person on it, if I could align with the team around it, then, and I know it's an if then it can be great and it can come to fruition. The call for a team is the othering. It could be a grander scheme. You know, when you're going to go to do that parking lot, you're going to need to get the painter in, you're going to need to get the construction guys in, the union, whatever it is, you're going to need to bring in the guns. And that's all, you know, there's othering aspects of it. Maybe not though in the design of it is what I'm hearing. You know, is a distinction that I'm hearing there.
Well, one of the distinctions is that in one example, you can assemble that team without all the extra thought baggage. And then in the other example, you have somebody who is trying to figure it out in advance, and it's thought baggage. It's no longer an aha idea. We went from a holy shit, I know how to organize the parking lot, to, oh my God, how am I going to do this? If only I could get the right people involved, if only I could get the right finances. So we went from a really great idea because of space, and we immediately started to try to control via thought. You just othered.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not necessary. That's a habit. It's the way that we're used to working with our environment. You don't need to do that. Look at some of the most successful projects that have ever happened. And we look at things and we're like, wow, if anything would have been any different, right? I couldn't have planned for this. Like just the right person at the right moment, at the right time, came into the right room and said the right sentence, and it just everything connected.
Right.
That's how things can occur, rather than I think that we should do it this way. So I don't think that the way that you think that we should do it is the right way that we should do it. So I think that we should do it the way that I think that we should do it. And then now here's all the problems and potential obstacles. And now let's make a plan, and let's make a plan for the plan. And then let's make a contingency plan for your plan not working because it's you and you're stupid and your plans never work. We've just gone down a rabbit hole of cognition, and it is by definition othering. The moment you go down the rabbit hole of thinking about yourself and other people, you are othering, period. You don't need to think about it. So if I see the Emmett Till, if I see what just happened in Nashville, and I go down the rabbit holes of verbal, internal, thought-based cognition, I can promise you that is a form of othering, unless it's leading to inspiring thought and that kind of trickles away because we're not trying to control it. That would be the hydrostasy. I had this great thought about how my energy body can contribute, and now I'm going to go back to my practice. I didn't go down any rabbit holes. A thought just occurred, and that's not an enemy of the state. What you just gave me the example of, Michael, is somebody that went from a good idea to the same old of attempting to manipulate and trying to control outcomes.
So
Here I have a great
So
idea,
bef-
so let me think about it a lot more. Let me think about it harder and more and add more words to this so I can accomplish it. That's just the opposite of the inspired thought that came. I'm sure the inspired thought came when there was some space, and then all the thought immediately removes the space where the unfolding can occur.
Mm-hmm. And the reason it's othering is because all of your thought, you can't think about something you don't know. It's all a part of your known. It's your normal, ordinary cognition. You're not thinking of anything new. You're not thinking of anything creative. And if you did, you would just recognize that and move on, not try to control things further by trying to manipulate the circumstances. But what were you going to say, Mike? What else are you going to add?
No, that I'm trying to catch the difference there, because there is an aspect of development of plans, and I understand the inspired idea, and I'm saying to bring it to fruition with people. It seems to me there's got to be some aspects of planning, but it can be done in
Yeah.
It can be done in flow. It can be it can be
There's nothing
planned,
wrong
but
with planning.
and you don't have to attach to those exact ways. I do get that.
Planning doesn't take very long usually either. You have an idea, you put it on paper. That took 15 minutes out of my 1,440. Now what? If you're
I can see how it becomes a manipulation and control after it's this epiphany, this great idea. I mean, I know that I have the just to get into it, but I know is sort of like an inspired thought. It just comes in early in the morning, and I'm like, that right. There was space there, Donna. That's exactly right. It has to do with pet care. About our products. We have a specialized pet care in China and Europe, but we don't have it here in the States, only because someone's not championing it. And I just got the opportunity to help like Seeing Eye Dogs in New York, a whole lot of them, and a real statement in the industry, in the Seeing Eye Dog industry, if you will. And I realized that can be for all pets in the States, and it would really be altruistic and help, dogs, cats, all types of pets, animals. I'm like, wow, isn't that a great, .org type of mission, one that people can get around, and also, so I see that it's out there in the UK and China, and it can easily be here. In the past, it was we need funding and testing and all this stuff, and the truth of it is, there's a few paths that don't require such big thought and such big testing and all. It's already been tested, and I look closely at it, and I'm like, if I could just have, this is the if and then the othering, have a good team around it, and I start to talk to the right people about it, and the egos jump in and I want to slice it and dice it before it gets out of the gate, and so that's why I'm looking closely at this, and I'm like, I do other a lot, so my tendency is to other, and my training is to have like a team behind me or a good team with me, so that I trust in it over and just work with those team members. But now I'm being challenged to sort of bake this idea and work with it closely and get it off the ground before I go into any othering or in a different manner so that it doesn't become that.
Sure. So where's your practice when you're doing all that? That's all. My only question
Right.
is,
Where's the mind
is
and
an
do I
inspired idea enough? Maybe it just stays an inspired idea and there is no future to it. Sometimes you write it down on a piece of paper and you put it down and it just doesn't come up again because it's not for you to do or whatever. Doesn't matter. How it unfolds is directly related to whether you're moving forward with a practice intact. And then the opportunities and the team and how it comes into fruition, or how it deviates and adapts in a completely different way than the original inspired idea from which it came. And maybe it's just a path to it. You don't know yet. You just have an inspired idea. And where's your practice? So you're assembling a team before you've even allowed for flow to occur. You go straight to action and making it happen, and what happened to the inspiration. So the unfolding of it really goes in conjunction with you continuing to practice, continuing to be in the space that allowed the inspiration to come. You know, it was probably enjoyable. You were feeling positive about what you were doing, and you were then all of a sudden in the space of overthinking or the fruition of this project, you saw other opportunities for this project. There may be a whole bunch of other inspired ideas and unfolding that occur, but once you stop practicing, you're trying to force something to happen with a overall large volume of thought, and inspiration doesn't come from that space. The inspiration that
Right.
came from a more open space.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, that was very clear. Appreciate that.
So I'll save this and I'll make an image for you. And this should also tie into the idea of, what really is othering. And we've seen these triangles before, and we're going to keep using the example of the three different people: one who isn't practicing at all, one who is in counterbalance / warrior training, and somebody who is in the capstone of their practice, meaning that they are seeing a more broad perspective of the moment, the more of the totality of self rather than individual aspects all the time. And then they're also cognizant of what I would call the abstract. I'll start with this one. This is how I usually draw it. And I'm going to show you what's going on with you, Mike.
Can I just interject something as you're doing that?
Sure.
The value of understanding the definition of
Oh
othering
boy.
is only so that we can agree on the term, so that when we feel some constriction or interruption in the flow, we can name it and go, oh, look, I'm othering. It's not so that you can't not do something. So Ernest can teach us all the things that pull us away from flow, but we can't just spend our lives avoiding the things that pull us away from flow. We can only practice the things that contribute to flow. So breaking it down in this example is a great understanding. It gives us an understanding of where the space is, but the way that we engage the space is to continue the practice, not to not other, but to continue to do the practice. So I just wanted to interject that.
Yeah, because by doing the practice, you won't be able to other, because it takes you a completely different direction. So in this example, for all three people, they had a good idea. So they had an idea about how to align the parking lot, or like you were talking about, with the pets. Okay, so all three individuals have had a good idea. In the first example, they're in common cognition, and so they just start to think about it. That's the pattern. Why are they thinking about it? Because they want it to come to fruition, because they're going to attach to their desires, and then they're going to attempt to manipulate and control. And maybe they get there, like maybe they bring some people together and they get some shit done, but it wasn't the most energy efficient dynamic. There was probably a lot of psychological suffering. They put that out there to the fifth destroyer, yada, yada, yada. It definitely wasn't the most efficient dynamic, but maybe they did get some shit done. And then they, maybe they get a lot of money, and then they're going to go spend it, and then they're going to be back in debt, and then they're going to be Donald Trump, or they're going to be somebody else with a lot of money but has no balance in their life. That's the first example of the person who had the good idea. Does that make sense, Mike? Does that sound familiar? You could probably see that in the island of the practical, people who are interacting exactly that way. Okay. And they are othering to the nth degree, because all they did is take stimuli, which was this aha idea, and they went into thought about themselves, their desires, their intentions, which you could put in parentheses, plan. We plan with our intentions, but the power of will maybe or maybe didn't come about, but maybe it did, and they did get some shit done, but it was probably a little difficult. Working with people probably wasn't the easiest thing in the world in that example. Does that make sense? In the second example, we have a person who had an aha idea, and they are in counterbalance or warrior training. They see the tendency to launch into thought streams because of the aha idea. But because they're used to practicing, they notice that these additional strings and streams of cognition don't feel as inspiring. So they can kind of tell that this is a repetitive and habitual act that they do whenever they have a good idea, is to try to manipulate and control. So instead, they're just going to kind of redirect back to the practice. And that's a second example. And now they may find that just new energy. They may start to align their desire, their intention, and their power of will, and it will likely be a little bit easier, and they'll have more learning opportunity. They'll have more overall opportunity because they're paying attention to the moment, which is where all opportunity exists, not in our thoughts about it. Your thoughts are a box. Why? Because it's based on a language that is finite. You only have so many words and letters. Sorry for it, but it is what it is. It fits in a box. It's finite. So in the first example, they're using the finite. They're launching into thought and extreme othering. That's other. And I don't care what their cause is. I don't care whether they think it's justified or it's coming from love and adoration and connection to the infinite. They launched into unproductive, repetitive, and habitual thought patterns about it that interrupted the spirit. It interrupted the flow of the energy body, and they will get sick and help create the conditions for suffering and sickness around them. That's the fifth destroyer. In the second example, they noticed that they started to do it. And they noticed the habit. They went back to their practice, and maybe they had to do that a few times because of the tendency to go back to the patterns and the othering and yada, yada. They still had the aha idea, or in the example of Emmett Till, they still felt the injustice, but they knew that the habitual repetitive thought patterns were going to lead to repetitive habitual actions, which will lead to more of the same shit. Do those two examples make sense so far, Mike?
Yes, right on.
In the third example, somebody is practicing hydrostasy and they could feel the pull before the thought. They never started to other. They already know. They're used to these types of things. So when thoughts happen that are ahas, they already know, go back to your practice, that we don't have to chase the tail and we don't have to go down the rabbit hole, because your energy body is in that space. The unknown is in that space. Good ideas are in that space. The present moment is where the right person at the right time is going to say the right thing. That's where it's going to happen anyway, so I better pay attention. The good idea to help prevent injustice in the future, that's going to happen in the moment. The right people at the right time in the right way, the synchronicities, the omens, that's all going to happen now. So I'm going to pay attention to it so I can see it, and so I can change with change, and so I can move with what is called just do energy or flow state. In the third example, the person brought these two triangles together, and then all of a sudden their desire is overlapping intelligence. And then you're like, well, wait a second, that aha idea, well, I actually have an even better one. An idea that is even more expansive, one that is even more creative and leads towards even more inspiration. And then we have intelligence. And that is going to add to the overall knowledge bank of the human species, and the whole species and planet is going to benefit from my good idea. And I'm going to be able to act on my knowledge because I'm more likely to remember it, because it's tied to the fundamental intelligence and desire of the human being. And then before you know it, there's a circle over this star, and I call that the hydrostatic state of being, the hydrostasy effect. In the middle of this hydrostasy effect is personal power, and it bridges these. It bridges desire with intelligence. It bridges intelligence or intention with wisdom, and now all of a sudden your actions are very beneficial to everybody, very wise. Whoops, I'm messing that one up. But and then all of a sudden your knowledge and your power of will are instantly, these are all overlapping. And then before you know it, you had a good idea, you didn't overreact, you didn't start othering, or you experienced an injustice, you didn't overreact, you didn't start othering, you went back to the energy body, you found amazing ways to help the world around you and to help your idea come into fruition. Those are three different examples. Obviously, the third example is the most efficient. And that's what we're working towards in this practice through hydrostasy. But like Donna said, even the counterbalance, it's like, whoa, wait a second. I'm starting to think dumb shit, and that's not going to help me right before I go into this business meeting. I need to be that shining light if I want others to follow, right? I have to be a good leader. I want people to want to follow. I don't want them to think that they should because my ideas are better. Most people don't.
And whether they do or not, it doesn't matter, because
It
if they do, then they're the people that are going to, then that's what unfolded. And if they're not, then it's, oh, I'm in a direction that's not, it's all good information. It's all information for me to include in my three aspects of knowledge, from which I will be inspired to act upon or not act upon. But the practice is back to the practice, instead of the thoughts about trying to influence them in my direction, trying to change their minds, trying to show them how valuable my idea is. Though that will all come authentically and from the flow of your practice. So that's where it comes first. The thoughts about how to get in the way of the actual doing of the just do energy. So perhaps your practice, perhaps your idea will come to fruition, or some version of it will come to fruition. And this meeting, it doesn't have your thoughts about this meeting are only going to get in the way. Some planning is involved, yes, perhaps a PowerPoint, perhaps some information on paper, maybe a little practice of what you're going to say. But beyond that, where's your practice? Where's your practice? Where's your practice? Because that's where all of the opportunity for the idea to unfold, and what just do energy is directed. And is it with these people, or is it just one of these people, or is it none of these people? That's really your navigation. The thoughts about it, there are thoughts about it, but are there an overwhelming amount of thoughts? Is it a pattern of behavior that you think is the way to success, that you've done over and over again, that doesn't work?
Yes.
And if there is that, then you go back to your practice. And if you go back to your practice no matter what, that's always the answer.
And here's the biggest habit that interferes with the practice, that interferes with that balanced state of being, which if you can create that balanced state of being, you are doing more to cure injustice than a lot of people around you. Like, I don't want to get too much into the labeling that, but you are really contributing to change in the world when you are in the state of hydrostasy. There is power in that balance to influence change in others. You create the conditions for peace. Just like when you're in severe psychological suffering, you help create the conditions for suffering. Mike has to take responsibility for his own mind and his own thoughts. So I'm not going to say I did it for him, but I can help create the conditions for suffering for everybody in this room just by being a huge asshole, right? It creates the conditions. But so this is what normally occurs though. In the first example, the person who is going to other to the nth degree. In the second example, the person notices the othering and then they redirect. And in the third example, they've started to break up the habit of othering, so they don't do it in the first place. But what occurs, Mike? You have a great fucking idea and you're like, oh my God, this is the best idea ever. And then the mind starts to think about desire. Your desire, the way you think things should be. And maybe you think it's true. We look at an injustice and we're like, it shouldn't be that way. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily disagree. In fact, I'll just agree. I'll just say, yes, this should not be in the world, but it is in the world. So I can only think about that desire so much before it is a rabbit hole. But the tendency is we see something, we have an emotional response, and then we just start to think about our desire and ultimately what we want, what we don't have. So we get the business idea, and now we need to think, because we've gotten into the habit. That's how we interact with the things that we want. And that's how we paint our pictures, through thought, because that's the habit, is thinking, going down rabbit holes of thought. We see an injustice like what we saw in Nashville, and then the habit is to go into thoughts about it. Even if you think your thoughts are correct, even if you think your thoughts are true, even if you think your thoughts are justified, and maybe they are, maybe you are right. This should not be happening. Your thoughts about it are a habitual, repetitive pattern that will not make you feel well, that will interrupt with the flow of spirit and will contribute to the fifth destroyer, period. That is what is occurring because you're thinking about the desire. Whether you think the desire for change is right, wrong, plus, minus, should be, shouldn't be, it is a repetitive, habitual pattern. It is a closed feedback loop, and it doesn't really lead to change. And if it does, it's not the most energy efficient dynamic. It's slow, it's painful. Does this make sense?
It does, but I think that you've actually interfered with the desire by deciding there is an outcome, and this is the outcome that needs to happen, and these are the people that are at fault for preventing the outcome. It's not so much that you're thinking about the desire.
Well, even thinking about the desire feeds to the overall imbalance in that first example, because it's the sheer momentum.
Mike was giving the example of this idea, and he was saying, and it would benefit. It's an altruistic idea. Like, not only is it a way, like the pet industry is really lucrative, and there's a desire for it, and there's evidence to prove that it's valuable for the dogs and the seeing eye dogs. Like, this is all a coming together of a bunch of things I desire. And so I would like to spend my time working on this kind of project because it is compatible with a lot of things that I desire to see as far as change in the world. But it's not so, it's getting over focused on getting everybody else to be in line with your desire. It's okay to follow your desire to some degree. I desire to be doing so. You desire, Ernest, to write books and do this class twice a week to share something that you find valuable and interesting, and so there's desire in that.
Right. No, just to be clear, like I said in the sentence, we're not talking about following a desire. Following a desire could be just new energy. and you always have a desire, and we work with that dynamic. All of that kind of goes without saying. What we're talking about is thinking about your desire, whatever your desire is. I don't care what your desire is. Thinking about it is a form of interference.
An imbalance, too much
And it will
thought.
lead, and it will, and the reason we're doing it is because of the imbalance in the first place, and the tendency to habitually think about everything. We think about our desires, we think about our not desires, we think about their desires, we think about all of that. Is all othering. It is all just our picture inside of our picture, imagining other people's pictures, creating little tiny bubbles of perception inside of our picture that we call other
Continuing
people.
to do it.
And continuing to do it, because
Yes.
this is the first example of the person who's not practicing at all. So they have an inspiring idea, or they see suffering and injustice, and they launch into thoughts that they think are righteous, that they think are correct. We think we need to think about the things that we need to think about because it's the only way we're going to get shit done. False. We can look back and see that we can get things done in a way that is more fluid, that is more in alignment, and is more balanced and more energy efficient ultimately. So the principle is thought is the fundamental imbalance that we're talking about. Your desire could be for world fucking peace. It could be for our species to evolve to the 9th dimensional level of yada, yada, yada. If you think about it all the time, you are in a repetitive, habitual thought pattern that eventually will not make you feel well, that is existing in an extreme, and it will cause suffering for you, help create the conditions for suffering around you, and then it will add to the 5th destroyer. The way that you get things done is in flow. Micro and macro flow state. By getting out of your own way, you stop interfering. Now all of a sudden, all of your thoughts are creative, they're helpful, but they're not continuous. You know when it's time to get shit done. You know when it's time to plan. Everything starts coming together. You start working with everyone. There's no force, there's no imbalance, and all of a sudden you look like that leader that just knows how to bring people together. Thoughts will occur. They will occur in balance. They will occur as a process of communication, not trying to figure shit out. The only time I'm thinking usually is when I'm thinking of how can I organize an idea to communicate it to another person so that we're actually communicating. I am not thinking about how to solve my problems. I'm not thinking about how to get shit done. You're either getting shit done or you're not. So you're trying to get into a state of balance, ebb and flow that is powerful, that will bring people together, that will be the right idea at the right time. You're paying attention to the moment so you see things and how they're moving. And then before you know it, all of a sudden this little thing called intuition is like, hey, Mike, this guy is not good for the project. And but you're like, on paper, you know what? I'm just going to listen to my intuition this time. And you find out that this person would have been terrible for your project. That's how things can work, Mike. It doesn't have to be, I have an idea, now let me use my thought to force everything into the way that I'm going to focus. That's still focusing on the desire, is that force. I have desires, and then I put them on the back burner and I focus on the moment and I slowly move towards that desire without trying to control and manipulate. And then before you know it, the right profession, the right career, the right things just start to come together, and it all makes sense. And that's when desire and intelligence are overlapping. And then you don't even need to worry about shit the way that, and then you know that because you have this broad perspective, you're doing things just because you fucking can, not because you feel this, oh my God, I've got to save the animals. No, it doesn't have that heaviness anymore.
That's why every one of these classes, when we come on Thursday with questions or a scenario or a reflection about something, it always boils down to where's your practice while you're doing that? Like go back to the practice. And the way that you break it down is looking at it through the lens of perception of the question, but it still always comes back to the same thing: the habit, the momentum, the space between thought, the balance of the most minimal amount of thought possible and balance with everything else. It always comes back to the same thing. Always. It doesn't matter what words we use and how infinitely we break it down and how elegantly it's broken down. It helps for a greater communication and understanding of what we're talking about, but the practice is still the practice.
And if your attention's on the capstone of this practice, it cannot simultaneously just be focusing on the shit that you think that you want. It doesn't work that way. Does that make sense, Mike? So you had a thought, you made a plan, you had a few more thoughts, you adjusted your plan. But wouldn't you say that if you have a thought, a plan, and a desire, that there's always something in this moment right now that you can do, even if it's not doing anything, even if it's just relaxing because you need some space, you need some self-care time. But there's always something in this moment that you can do to direct things towards the desire that doesn't require thought. It requires the focus of conscious attention. Look at the things that you've ever gotten accomplished that were really amazing. It required a lot of doing. All of that doing could have been doing without all of the extra thinking and trying to control and manipulate because of the tendency to focus on desire. Does that make sense? It is possible. Whether you work the practice enough to access it is a different story, but that is the practice. And with that expanded universal view, you realize that I'm always gonna have a desire that I have to leave undone because I'm going to die. So, I have 130 credit hours in front of me and I don't feel nervous. I'm not trying to get to an end destination because I'll be 110 years old and likely signed up to someone's course because I like learning. So I'm going to learn now. I've learned in the past and I'll continue learning. I defined the fifth destroyer. Where did I write it? The fifth destroyer is the collective momentum. There is a video on YouTube in the 20 topics called the 5 destroyers. The fifth destroyer is the collective momentum of society, and that is most influenced by the energy body. And because the energy body of the common mind is in a complete fucking mess, which is why we have all of our sickness and disease and problems and mental issues, is because of the fifth destroyer, because our energy body is being interfered with the way that we think and the way that we behave. And that has collected momentum over time. And then we end up with what we call normal. Anger is normal. Hate is normal. War is normal. We've interacted with war for pretty much every single day of our lives. It's existed. So that is the result of the collective unconscious human mind that I call the fifth destroyer. Now, the collective aspect of the human species is neither good nor bad, nor plus nor minus. But the way that we're currently interacting with our experience, it is absolutely detrimental to the evolution of consciousness. And then again, the evolution of the physical species. We will cease to exist if the destroyer continues to gain momentum. We feed the destroyer by feeding the nemesis. So we never interact with the destroyers directly. We just stop feeding the nemesis, which is a mind that's below the threshold of active recognition, likely thinking about desires, thinking about plans, thinking about getting other people to do things the way that they want to do them, because we've really attached to our own viewpoint of how things should be. Or we're just attaching to all of this shit, not realizing that we are the entire universe. We've lost touch with that, Michael. Do you see that? The moment that we start to focus on these little individual aspects of our life, we have lost touch. It's focus, it's attention, it's the slider. You are either stepping back and you feel in this moment that you are the entire universe, noticing itself, noticing its attention, noticing its place in space and time, noticing its desire, noticing the focus of attention towards the desire in the moment happening now, even if that means to do nothing, to just sit in Manta style sitting and wait. Even if that's what's most appropriate, we can do that. Does that make sense, Mike? What this practice will do, yes. You
It-
can add
it-
something there? Wasn't sure.
I do hear you saying it's still thinking, it's just not continuous thinking. So there's space.
It's
and it
not
can be
continuous,
creative and
and
but there's no thought.
it's not just no thought. This is a system of balance. We don't declare war on thought, but you have been thinking nonstop. How old are you?
Oh, I get a break sometimes, my brother. I've been
They don't add up to much.
I've been
They're
for the
pebbles.
practice.
They're pebbles in the ocean, Michael. Let's be honest. When you really look at your own mind and see how much you're thinking, if you're practicing
be
quasi, they're pebbles in the ocean. We're just tossing little pebbles we're trying to hit a freight train by throwing spitballs at it. That was
It
our
must be
yoga
true.
practice for 15 minutes.
Yeah, I hear you. And then we string a few together. But yeah, I'm just a disciple here, just navigating. Sometimes I feel like I'm the Truman Show, but that's when I'm practicing. I'll feel
That's when you're
that way.
practicing. Can you see the multiple dimensionality of the human experience, the known, the unknown, and you know that you're still interacting with the unknowable. But
Right.
what I'm talking about is bringing awareness of our totality into the moment happening now, not as abstract ideological wordplay, not as the shit that we say in yoga when we're teaching yoga or we're talking about the results of yoga. I'm not
Life
talking
is
about
good.
what's that?
Life is good.
But we're feeling that. Do you feel that life is good right now?
Right.
If you feel it, the thought is not required.
Right. It's the feeling. Understood.
And the more that you pay attention to the feeling, the more it grows, the easier you find it, the more you can access it, the more it gains momentum, and the more that is your contribution to the fifth destroyer. And then eventually it's not the fifth destroyer, it's the fifth factor of human evolution. But for now, it's our destroyer. It is what's tearing us apart. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm coming up with unless I don't know, Jerry has one. There's a but factor for me, okay? And it's back to othering. Not that I'm caught up in the thought. I'm just
You are,
I'm
and the othering.
I may be. I'm just being straight with where my attention went and where I'm thinking, but Ernest. And so in my time I had felt that, had good feeling and then some other would come like did you see Top Gun or the old one?
I've seen the old one.
Gotta see the new one. It's great. I just watched it. The other, it could have been manager, wife, life, whatever you want to, I can name the different destroyers and they're my own, but it was like a heat-seeking missile on the good feeling that I created or that I had felt, so that that I was in a good flow, and boom, or the other just whatever it looked like, and whatever it looks like, it comes in all different forms. And then I would say to you, man, it seems like it's coming to get me, like in the Matrix, those I'm not sure the name of it, but those little bug-like centipedes that come to find the pod. It's like, yeah, and I'm like, damn, I'll call that the destroyer for a second. Or even last night came up with a guy that's just being an a-hole, like a real and I had some reaction before I just caught myself and was like, oh, this is, but yeah, the tendency for that to come to test you, I guess to test
To
me.
test you? Come on, Mike.
It seems that it comes up to test you, like for hardcore, a very
It's your
close
own
person.
psychology. It's your own mind. It's your composite picture. Nothing is testing you. You're testing yourself. There's no outside force
Meaning your
testing
mind is
Michael.
the same as the other person?
It means that your mind isn't, you're not interrupting the patterns. You're just allowing the same old to occur. And I would call that ordinary cognition. Same thoughts, same order, same responses, same patterns, same results, same thing. What's new? Where's the unknown? Where's the feeling of spirit in this example? It's inaccessible because we're too busy going back to the focused little narrow of one aspect of ourselves. Like, you know, intellectually that we're the whole universe, but where is that when you're sitting there thinking about shit? When somebody else is displacing you somehow magically, I don't know how they do it, but apparently they do. It's you, it's your mind. Those are your patterns. Those are your responses. So you're still not taking full responsibility for all of your factors, which is your composite picture, your field of perception, your bubble of perception. Still not taking full responsibility for that. And now it's other people that are doing this to us. Otherwise, it's just a person being an asshole. How does that have anything to do with you? Well, how do you interact with that is how do you respond to that? What do you do in the face, in the light of that? That's what we're talking about. And if you're not doing this practice, you will very likely just go back to repetitive habits. Whatever they may be, whatever Michael's habits are, that's what you'll go back to. Very likely labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting, trying to figure it out, trying to understand, thinking about yourself, thinking about the other person. But the bottom line is you're thinking, and very likely not practicing, not doing the rule of three, not redirecting, not doing warrior training, not doing counterbalance training, and just hoping a little check-in is going to have this long-term, deep psychological effect and reshape your island of the practical. It won't. Was there a question in there?
I don't know, but that was an awesome kick-ass. And there you go. Boom.
I mean, it's just it. If you rewatch this video, I broke down the human experience. Go back to that, Michael. What is occurring? We have the physical body, we have the mind, we have sensory perception that creates our composite picture. What are you putting into that composite picture? You're putting it in there. Somebody has moved into your composite picture, another bubble of perception. You never access it. You never interact with it directly outside of attention itself. So what is really even going on? What are the dynamics of what's occurring? You're putting into your composite picture repetitive and habitual patterns of attempting to control and manipulate to get the outcomes that you desire. And men tend to do that to the nth degree without even knowing it. But now that you know it, what are you going to do about it? And it's not a Michael thing, it's the human species thing. It's just the way that people are most used to interacting with their own cognition is through thought. And don't you see how everything goes back to that? Not just the way you're thinking, but the habit of responding to our sensory perception with thought. That creates the othering. If you keep doing that, you will always be othering. You have to interrupt it. Does that make sense? I don't know how else to spell that out. You have to work the practice. If you want Qigong to help, you have to work the practice. If you want something else to help, I'm assuming you have to do it, whatever else it is. But this is a mind management thing. You'll learn to manage your own cognition, and eventually you can't help but notice that you are consciously creating, and the world and the universe is essentially not bending to your will, bending to the direction of your intention, because Yi leads Qi, the mind leads the energy. If you're just thinking about dumb shit, your mind is leading the energy to dumb shit. It's very basic. If your mind is where you put it, eventually every aspect of your life will be where you put it, because everything is following your mind. It's so easy, at least to see, to step back and see what is really happening in the human condition. I have desires, Michael. I want to write books. I would like a career so that my art doesn't have to have any pressure. I just want art to feel like art. I don't want any pressure, and I don't need much money. I have capped myself at $100,000 minus paying off debt. I never want more in my bank account than that. I mean, I could go on and on about how things in my life are exactly where I put them. And if it's bumpy, it's because I'm going away from my practice. If it's smooth and elegant and powerful, it's because I'm going towards my practice. I could sensationalize like a motherfucker, Michael. You have no idea. If I wanted to, I could just sit here and sensationalize and inflate my own ego and my own composite picture to the nth degree. That's a habit, fortunately, that I haven't created for myself. But yes,
I can't help but think about I obviously can only communicate my own experience, but
Mhm.
in the beginning of the practice, I remember wanting to understand what you were speaking about, and the breakdown of it gave me some relief because I was understanding the breakdown of it, and it was resonating with my experience to a degree that I could acknowledge at that point in time. I can acknowledge more now because I'm more sensitive to the breakdown of what I'm doing with my own cognition than I was earlier in the practice. But I did recognize somewhere along the line, I was asking questions, and my motivation for the question was because I was being devil's advocate. I was saying, yeah, it's easy for Ernest because he's home all day and his wife goes to work, or it's easy for Ernest because he's spent years doing this, or it's easy for, like, I was othering, like, you do want to understand or do you not want to understand? And what resonated with you, it makes perfect sense that the overall amount of thought in my mind is causing my suffering. And I can see it in other people and I can see it in myself. So he is offering techniques to help me to reduce the overall amount of thought. So whether I think focusing on the color green is stupid or not stupid, but then pick something else. Just shut up and do it, Donna. And when you feel like shit, just take a breath and say, how much of your own thinking is causing this suffering? And it always was. And the answer was always go back to the practice. Now, it wasn't so easy, and it took me a lot more suffering to notice and to go back to the practice as it did now. I was doing a lot more forgetting than remembering than I do now, but the fundamental basic facts of the matter are exactly the same. So whether I could understand that diagram that you drew, it would all seem like gobbledygook to me in the beginning of the practice, or make me feel like I have so far to go to even understand all that. I didn't need to understand all of that. In theory, I didn't need to understand. I just need to practice. And then my lens of perception will clear, and my ability to see data, assimilate data, decide what to do with data becomes less and less and less words associated with it. I can just navigate because I've been practicing. That's it. It always comes back to the same thing. Just practice. I don't need Ernest. I don't need to give Ernest every example of my life and why I should have practiced in that moment, and whether I was othering or not othering or allowing entertainment suck my brain, or those were helpful. Obviously, all these discussions were helpful. I wouldn't be still here coming to this class. They were helpful, but it didn't supersede me doing the practice. That's what the only element that I was able to change, no matter how well I understood it or thought I could teach it or write a book about it. I need to be doing it, or I'm not, or it doesn't, there's no other factors in the equation, but I need to be doing it.
Yeah, doing it, remembering to do it, redirecting back to it. This whole practice, the Qigong practice, is two things: establishing points of connection points of attention. We call them tricks of attention, and then learning to maintain them.
And the more I do it, the less bumpy the smoother it gets.
Yep.
And when it gets bumpy, I don't have to judge the bump. I don't have to analyze the bump. Sometimes I'll go, wow, look at that, or I can't help but notice that coming up. But that's all the thought I want to have about it, because my peace is just so much more important to me. So noticing it, redirecting, going back to my practice. I do it all day long. Sometimes I do it 100 times a day. Sometimes I don't need to. Sometimes I'm just practicing all day long, and there's just a few bumps. And sometimes there's more bumps because of my battlegrounds, because of my box, and what I have in that box and how I populate that box makes the difference of whether it's smooth or bumpy. But the remedy is always to go back to the practice.
Yep. And go back to the practice means you have a toolbox of tricks of attention, points of attention that you have intended in advance. Going back to the practice means you rule of 3 to at least 3 of those, including talking yourself through what you're doing, right? Because that's the cognition part of it. The thought is already occurring, so you use thought to redirect back to your list, your EGONG checklist. That's what we mean by go back to the practice. That is going back to the practice. If we go back to our list, we're going back to our practice. Does that make
Exactly.
sense? Yeah. And that does make sense too. Yeah, you're not going to figure it out with the same head, or you could look at it like that composite picture. We're looking at a composite picture that we have created to see what's what about other people's composite pictures, or the greater composite picture.
And is it frozen? Is it frozen with the system of data and beliefs that never changes? If that's the case, then you're not practicing, because if you're practicing, then that box changes.
Yes.
It changes, it evolves.
And I feel like I've gotten to the point where we have the first EGONG book. By the time I start school, we'll have 2 EGONG books, which is basic alignment and counterbalance. That's the 2 most important to get started. You really, I do think, need both to really get going, you know? So Michael, go back to the practice, go back to those books. You know, where are your points of attention? Did you start out in the beginning of the day? Have you set up reminders? Do you have an object of power? What is your mantra? What are your quotes of power? What are your primary directions of attention? What is a direction of attention? How are we redirecting? Is the rule of 3 redirecting back to our list that we have in basic alignment? That's what counterbalance is, redirecting back to the list that you made in basic alignment, and you've added some more stuff to the list in counterbalance. That's this practice. That's the practice. You got to work the practice to do the practice, or you're not doing the practice. You're just floating. You're just coasting. And coasting, you can still feel good. And then, Mike, we might get to the discussion that we can have fun or not have fun and still feel freedom. We can feel good or not feel good and still feel freedom. We can be on the high flying disc or not be on the high flying disc, and we can still feel freedom. And this will help prepare us for the balance and adaptation to challenges that we will all inevitably face.
That project can come to fruition and make you wealthy, or it could not even get past the first meeting, and you'll still
And you
feel
still
free.
feel free. Bottom line, when we start to tap into that, then we've really found ourselves in the hydrostatic state of equilibrium, which is always changing, but you're changing with it because you're so pristinely aware. Impeccable self-awareness is more than just what we think we know. It includes the unknown. Okay, I think that's good. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me, or kind of like we did, Jerry posted something, we waited till Thursday, kind of did on Tuesday. I described what I mean by connection, pre-processing, post-processing. Today I just broke down the human experience, like the fundamental nuts and bolts of sensory experience, processing of cognition, what is really happening. I would recommend rewatching that for more context into where this discussion ended up.
Yeah, and the othering, how you define
Othering.
othering for this in this context also came up.
Yes.
So I think
That's a good
between
one. Yeah.
that connection, definition on Tuesday and this discussion today, I would think that answered what you were looking for, Jerry, in the difference, how does othering factor in?
Yeah.
This connection kind of thing.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's the rabbit holes we want to watch out for. So the mind may have the initial thought, that's fucked up and I hate this. I wish this wasn't happening. Hey, that thought occurred. It's a response from the stimuli. Just keep on moving with our practice. But the practice would mean not going down rabbit holes, because the moment we start to think about it, whether we think what we're thinking about is true and correct and just and everything else, it is a habit of going down rabbit holes, which strings thoughts together, which is not decreasing the overall amount of thought throughout the day. Doesn't matter what we're thinking. If we're thinking in an imbalanced way, it will throw everything off and eventually can create suffering. Even if you're thinking about changing the world and loving one another, it doesn't matter. Eventually that thought, it doesn't matter if it's creative thought. Remember, there was a time where I had to start redirecting and writing creative thoughts down because they were coming too frequently, and it wasn't, there weren't enough gaps. It's where those gaps in the overall thought is where hydrostasy exists. Hydrostasy is completely inaccessible without space in the overall amount of thought. So that is the definition of othering, just to be clear on that othering. The moment we start to go into those thoughts, they will trace back to self, which then traces back to other, even if it's justified or righteous or correct and true, and it doesn't matter. It's a habit of trying to fix things or work things out or even interact with our bubble of perception, again, just by going back to the same old communication center in our brain, telling ourselves shit that we already know. That is a dysfunctional dynamic and is the definition of othering. Okay, so I'm going to go not other and do some Tai Chi, but I will be back on Tuesday. We're on like 17, no, 16, I don't know, but we're almost done with those topics. Next Tuesday, Shayna will be in Germany.
14 or 15.
So it's like 14 or 15. Yeah, so we're almost done. When we're done with those topics, Tuesday will go away. We will have just the group study. Hopefully by the time I start school, I will launch the Igong website. The Igong website will include the first 2 instructional books. You want to do this practice, do the books. Follow the instructions. Shit. I mean, I have wrote step by step, like literally step by step, this is how you do it, instructions. I can't make this practice any more accessible other than climbing into your brain and directing your attention for you.
Even how you do the steps by step, even how each step goes.
Exactly. Like I can't make it any more concise than that. And then Michael, eventually, Jerry, those who find interest, we do get into hunting power, and in the hunting power is deliberate folly. A person I cannot take responsibility for the teachings without offering it to a person who has started to create gaps in the overall amount of thought. That is a requirement for deliberate modulation in terms of offering it. A person can find themselves deliberately modulating by accident in a wide variety of ways, but in terms of me sharing the practice and the information and how to do it deliberately at will, I have to make sure that intelligence and desire are starting to align, and they'll do that automatically in the space of the overall amount of thought. So I will not offer deliberate folly, which is a way to interact with other people. Which is, we start to get into a word that some people aren't going to like, ruthlessness, or a place of no pity, because pity is leaking power, and it is a stream, and it is a rabbit hole. And even though we feel bad about what has occurred, if we start to fill our bubble of perception with pity, we are leaking power. So it's really important to not leak power, to not have self-pity, and to be very careful about how we view other people's situations, because it is through our own lens that we're viewing that. We're not actually seeing their lens at all.
No, and as a matter of fact, we're invalidating it by
Yeah,
trying to layer ours over theirs.
there you go.
It's an arrogant thing to do.
It is arrogant. And then before you know it, we're trying to help them, trying to change them, trying to offer them something that they didn't ask for. And that is all error as far as I'm concerned. So when we do start to talk about behavioral change, we have to talk about it assuming that our practice is pristine enough that we are maintaining a point of attention almost all day long. If we're forgetting more than we're remembering, we have no business talking about certain things. That's something that other teachers don't do necessarily. They don't take responsibility for the delivery. I have to. I've seen something that I find uninspiring, and rather than thinking about them too much, I let it influence my own behavior, my own output, and I do things in ways that I view. So it's not othering. It could have been at first, and then I see it, and then I just redirect it back to no. This is about my actions, my thoughts, my output, my bubble of perception. I'll go back to what I have direct interaction with, and that's the direction of my attention.
Well, you have to only because you are interested in practicing what you preach. You're not doing the practice if you are speaking about things that you've only heard, or if it's not your direct experience, then you're violating your own principles for practice.
Right. Yeah. And I do view it, when I look at universal principle, that inspires personal principle. So the universal principle is that everything is here to create. Everything is in a process of creation. So then I let my personal principle stem from that. And then I'm like, well, I'm here to create. What do I want to create? So what I want to create becomes my personal principle. It becomes my principal focus. It becomes my principal thing, but knowledge. So I do view I have a personal responsibility to share knowledge, which includes information, personal experience, and the experience of others, and even times where I did express it, and even times where I didn't express it unto wisdom. Those are good talking points as well. But I do view that almost as an obligation, that I have an obligation to add to the knowledge bank of the human species because I believe it to be beneficial. So what I would view it as a violation of personal principle to know what I know about the mind and about thinking and about the human experience and not make it available. I would view that as a violation of personal principle. So what have I done? Without force, without trying to, and when it starts to feel like force, when it starts to feel like control, I stop doing it. The Facebook Lives, sharing to groups that weren't in complete alignment to what I was talking about, not taking responsibility for the message because I'm looking for followers, all that shit stopped because that's not my interest. My interest is to make it available and to do it. That's it. I do my own practice because it makes my life what I want it to be, quality. And then I share it because I know that anybody, most likely anybody can do it if they want to. Okay, so I'll see you on Tuesday if you can make it. I do not have time this Sunday for one-on-ones, but if you want a one-on-one next Sunday, I am at, I think it's $1 a minute or whatever. But and then I have 2 classes to post to YouTube. I'm off today, so I'll post the Tuesday and the Thursday class today. Okay. All right, and I might post this one to Facebook or YouTube, even though, well, I might post this one to Facebook or cut it, because I mean, I really broke that shit down. Like and I have a knack for it. I know organizing, but I really broke down what is happening in the human experience so we can also see what's not happening. That's important too. We see that, oh, wait a second, this isn't actually happening. I don't know what they're thinking. Not really. Okay, that makes sense. All right. All right. So I'll see you guys Tuesday if you can make it. But otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Shayna is going to Germany on Sunday. Hopefully she can still make some of our classes, but we'll see.
Have
Oh,
fun,
that'd
Shayna.
Yeah. Have a great trip. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Yep. See you guys.